You're listening to the Art of Procurement, episode 141.
Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome to this week's Art of Procurement podcast. And I'm joined today by Dawn Tiura. Dawn is the president and CEO of SIG, short for Sourcing Industry Group. And Dawn and I's paths have crossed many times over the past 18 months, and it was great that we were finally able to carve out some time for a chat in between some of our rather hectic travel schedules of late. And in today's conversation, Dawn shares a little bit of her background, her inspiration, and her motivations that have guided her career to date, and the mission that she's pursuing at SIG. I also asked Dawn what are the challenges that are top of mind of the CPOs that she talks to on a really regular basis. But the basis of our conversation really is around technology and digitization and the impact on procurement. And now I've had some recent shows, talking about this in, I think, more of an abstract sense. But what I loved about my chat with Dawn today is that she just rolls off use case after use case, real world examples of how technologies such as RPA, of augmented reality, of 3D printing, how are they impacting procurement today? Never mind in the future. I think that you're really going to enjoy the show. I enjoyed the interview. So with that said, let's go straight into the conversation. So hi everybody, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm joined today by Dawn Tiura, the president and CEO of SIG, or Sourcing Industry Group. So Dawn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Phil. I'm glad to be here.
And me too. And I know when I was looking at your background, and we've talked a little bit about this before, you, I think, were a CPA by training. So how did you get into procurement?
It is interesting. So yes, I am a recovering CPA
Right.
and truly a bean counter at heart. I love the numbers. But it's interesting. I had a CPA firm in Palo Alto, California, and this was back in the early 80s. And I was working with a lot of startups, pre-IPO, before there was a Silicon Valley. And one of my clients was a consulting firm that was staffed by PhDs in OD, organizational development. And they had just discovered strategic sourcing. So they said, we're doing this huge project at Kaiser Permanente, which is a huge hospital chain out west. And they said, we know we're driving value from strategic sourcing, but we don't know how to quantify it. So, of course, PhDs and ODs are not numbers people. Right. So they hired my CPA firm to go in, and I built the very first cost model, detailed cost model with the process mapping and everything for strategic sourcing. And I fell in love with sourcing. And so, ironically, sort of a funny story, I went on a 3-day offsite because I just thought, here I am, I've reached my age, I've got my 2 kids, I'm a partner in my own firm. Like, what's next? And I did a 3-day offsite with a life coach, and I came home, I divorced my husband, sold my CPA firm, and went into consulting.
Right.
And I've been in sourcing ever since. So I've loved it ever since. So interesting transition by chance, and I'm so thankful it happened.
Yeah, so I guess that's a pretty dramatic kind of offsite to go and make all those kind of life changes and to think about this as a new profession, and especially when you kind of, I don't know, the words made it probably aren't as appropriate, but you're comfortable, you've obviously been successful in the career that you chose. Then what made you stay then? So you decided, procurement sourcing's for me. How you've stayed here ever since?
Because it really woke me up to the people side of life and of business. So coming at it from a numbers perspective, in the beginning, it was, I'd show someone the analysis, and I thought, well, it's so obvious. It's right here. It's black and white. And then I realized that people don't change because it's logical. People change because you've made it safe and comfortable, and you've led them through the change. And so it really developed the other side of my brain, where I learned it's all about the people. I can have the best business case, the best analysis, best statistics, but if I don't make that journey safe and show people how to make the change and then stick with it as a leader, people will revert, and they need constant support. So it really woke up my mind to the fact that, we can be so much more powerful if we combine people skills with analytical skills. And so I just loved it. I loved seeing that light bulb go on for people. I loved having the biggest naysayer in the room, fall to being a huge, convert to the decisions we made. It just really excited me to be able to make this, make monumental changes within organizations. So sourcing has always been, it's always a challenge, but it's always been interesting and fun. And you get to learn about, commodities and services that you would never have, learned before. Like I can have an hour-long conversation with people about wood utility poles and the different kinds of wood. And, it's not cocktail conversation, granted, but it's interesting what you learn,
Yeah, kind of the depth and breadth of things that we touch is, I always found that you don't really get that in any other area of the business.
Yeah, so it's been very interesting that way. You just learn so much, and you are constantly meeting new people. And then I had the opportunity to present. So I was, I had started my own consulting firm, and one of my clients said, "Hey, you really need to go to SIG. That's where all the, the big players in our space are." So I hadn't heard of it, so I joined. I went to a conference and then joined, and then presented at SIG twice a year for 10 years. And that, further enamored me and got me into different industries for consulting. And then, of course, that was right when the whole e-procurement, the early days of Commerce One and Ariba.
Yeah.
So it was exciting time, to be in sourcing as well. So I've stayed in it ever since.
So when did you join SIG then?
Well, I joined as a member probably in 1992.
Right.
And maybe 95, right around that era. And then it was ironic. So in 2007 is when I took it over. And around 2002, I was talking to Barry Wiegler, the founder. And I jokingly said, "Barry, when I grow up, I want to be you." And he looked at me and goes, "What, you want to be a 70-year-old man?" And I started to laugh. And I said, "No, you're living the dream. You're talking about sourcing, leading edge, what's coming next all day long. And you're putting on these amazing events and educating people." And by that time, I had tried to quit my own consulting firm. I wasn't showing up for work. I tried to get fired. I really wanted out of consulting.
Right.
It had gotten to the 5 days, 5 days a week on the road had burned me out. And I had 4 kids, and I really wanted an alternate. So 5 years later, Barry called me up. He said, "Hey, do you want to grow up and be me?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "I'm ready to retire, and I can't think of anyone in the world I'd rather take this forward than you." So it's one of the things, like if you put it out there in the universe, sometimes it comes back in the most unexpected way.
Yeah.
So
and you never imagined
really
that.
For me.
Never imagined it probably when you first said that.
No, I said it, sort of off the cuff, and I meant it. It was really neat, but never dreamed it would actually happen.
So how has SIG evolved then over the 10 years since you joined? I think for the benefit of folks who are listening who might not know about SIG, maybe that's an opportunity as well to say kind of what SIG is today, but also I'm really interested to understand, from your journey at SIG, how things have evolved since you joined.
Yeah, so SIG is a 22-year-old membership association, and it started off in IT outsourcing. And so, heavy concentration of financial services because they did a lot of the outsourcing. And then about the time that I started coming to SIG, Barry had gotten interested in e-procurement and therefore strategic sourcing. And so in the early days, I would say the outsourcing people were on one side of the room, and they were like the cool kids because we have the really big deals and our extra zeros in our deals. And they looked over at the sourcing people and said, you buy pencils and paper and stuff like that. So there was a lot of disrespect between the two sides. And my mantra has always been, sourcing is a strict methodology that and we used it to do IT outsourcing. Yeah. We use the methodology in my sourcing engagements to do outsourcing. So I really felt strongly that a good methodology needs to be in place, whether you're buying in the millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, or if you're buying in the billions of outsourcing. You still need to have that methodology. And so when I took over at SIG, I would say the two sides were moving a little bit towards the center, but not passionately. So that would be one thing. And I think the other thing is that it's a little bit, Barry being having done it for so many years, was getting a little burned out.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of a good old boys club at that point. They'd like to, a lot of, if I hear one more story about the first IT outsourcing deal that took place, and it was getting to the point that let's not repeat ourselves. And
Right.
so my goal was really to revamp it to be, all about next practice, not just best practice.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when I took over SIG in November 2007, the financial crisis hit in 2008,
Right.
and we lost about 40% of our membership due to the crisis. And so I thought, well, I knew the recession would end, and I thought all I'm going to do is put every single dollar that we make back into the company to keep growing it and developing it so that when the recession ends, we are once again the premier world global, the largest global association for sourcing and outsourcing, anywhere with the best deliveries. And so that's what we did. We just put our heads down and worked hard and worked through the recession. And now we're up to that 40% came back. We're more than double in size than we were when I took it over from Barry. And we represent within SIG about $17 trillion US in spend, or US equivalent. So, so we can move the industry because we have the industry, top players in it.
I actually have some questions about what you said about next practice. I want to hold off on those a little bit for a moment, but I'm interested, how quickly do things change in the procurement and sourcing space? So, I'm looking as well. I like to kind of figure out what's coming down the pipe and how we can adjust and how we can take advantage of it and position ourselves to take advantage of it. But I'm interested from your perspective. You've been doing this for 10 years with SIG now. Is the pace of change faster, slower than it should be? Because my perception is it's always a little bit slower than what we think it might be.
I have to be honest with you. I think the industry has moved slowly, but during this time, if you think back, there was no CPO title back in the early days. I think we are successfully getting people away from just talking about price, but talking about value. But I don't think so. I think what my job is to lead our organization to make our members slightly uncomfortable.
Right.
And by that I mean I need to be bringing things to you before your CEO does. So I don't want them, anyone to, have their CEO say, what are you doing about Watson and who's that, or, are you looking at RPA and they don't know what it stands for and they haven't thought about it. So I really think it's our job if we want to, so let's be honest, Phil, there is a CPO title.
Yeah.
It's a small c, it's not a capital C.
Yeah.
And so we are not, if you take the CEO, the CFO, and I'm come from that industry, the CFO was a bean counter. It was not respected. It was the person with the green eye shade. It has now become the second in command in most companies.
Right.
It's right at the right hand of the CEO.
Yeah.
And yet, we see things, we see the stupidity and redundancy as it's happening live in the field every day. We can impact play before it ever hits a financial statement. And we can drive change current time and make an impact. But we're not seen as that strategic. And I think part of it is we have some baby boomers that need to really attrite out of the system. And then we just have to be, get that C to be a capital C. We have to be strategic. We are no longer buyers. Unless you buy fashion, I wish that title would just go away.
Right.
It's not sexy unless you buy fashion. We don't buy. We don't shop. We procure and we source. And we don't even just purchase. And I just wish those words would get out of our vernacular so we could be seen as strategic and automate the transactional and then, attack everything else that we can and drive value to the organization. And so I really, my whole passion in life is to elevate the sourcing industry to be seen as strategic as I know it is.
Yeah.
And from consulting in it,
right.
we can change so much.
Yeah. Do you think that our metrics hold us back? And I'm especially thinking of our relationship with the CFO. I think before I started, maybe when I was a little bit less mature in my career, I'd always think of the CFO only caring about cost. And obviously that's not the case, but we've kind of set ourselves up to only make ourselves relevant in a cost conversation. do you think anything's really going to change until we're able to change that and how, we measure ourselves with our executives, but also the perception we give on others of what we can do?
So I like the term equivalent revenue rather than savings. I think that gets people's attention more. So, a dollar saved is a dollar to the bottom line. And it's probably triple what we claim if we look at equivalent revenue.
Yeah.
Because a dollar coming in at the top is not a dollar coming out the bottom. We don't earn every dollar that we sell. So to me, I think the conversation, I'd like to move it to equivalent revenue because then it's seen as strategic. And yes, we're never going to get away from cost savings, but we also can drive so much more value. So, when you're learning or teaching folks about performance metrics and you're thinking about cost, quality, and service, you can only push so hard on one of those points if you put it on a triangle or a three-legged stool until it breaks. And if I push and push and push on cost,
right,
eventually I'm going to have to give up quality or service.
Right.
Conversely, I demand service levels that are insane and unbelievable. Eventually it's going to come out in quality or cost. So, if you think of it as a three-legged stool, we have to be informing people that we're about cost, quality, and service. And sometimes, if there's a true breakthrough, you can push on all three at once. But that's a breakthrough technology or a breakthrough event that happens. But most of the time, we have to carefully balance cost, quality, and service so we're delivering the best value to the organization. And that's the conversation that I want us to start having more often.
Right.
What are your pain points? Is it quality? If it's quality, then let me focus on quality, knowing that I might have to give a little on cost or service. Or is it service levels? It's not always the lowest total cost because I can go with the lowest total cost, but if I have to compromise something else to get it, it really isn't the lowest total cost because eventually quality or service are going to come back into the equation.
Yeah. No, and that's what I've always thought and kind of encourage others to think, even though when you have savings as a metric, if you are providing a service that the business actually values and you're helping them deliver outcomes that are important to them, you're always going to have people who are standing up for what you bring, for what you achieve, and see you as value, that you're adding something for them. And so those people standing up for you, in my mind, unless you're a company who's on the verge of bankruptcy and every single cent really is the determinant between you surviving or not, having those people stand up for what you're able to do and helping them drive outcomes is as important to me as being able to save, an extra X percentage that ultimately, as you say, it goes round, it comes round. And I think that's one of the difficulties that we have is kind of that balance.
Yeah.
You mentioned it. You mentioned earlier that the companies who are members of SIG have a combined spend of around $17 trillion. So obviously an awful lot of money. And I think that there's probably few people within the procurement community that speak to as many procurement leaders as you do. We're actually talking just off mic about travel schedules. So you're definitely talking to a lot of folks. What are the procurement leaders that you talk to actually most concerned about right now? What's some of their greatest challenges?
I would say risk is top of mind for everybody right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all kinds of risk. We've seen the fall of some folks in the industry by not addressing risk, and their jobs have been terminated. But it's obviously cybersecurity risk is number one, and a lot of people just don't know how to address it. They can do it with the first tier suppliers. It's really hard for them to do it with the second tier and third tier suppliers. And our cybersecurity risk goes all the way down to the nth level of suppliers that we're dealing with. So I'd say risk is number one around cybersecurity. But then we have geopolitical risk.
Right.
We have the climate issues that result in these horrendous storms and things like that. So protecting our supply chains is extremely important, but it's become much more complicated. And then with social media, people are quick to find your flaws, and before you know it, we don't use postal mail to spread the news anymore.
Right.
We use Twitter and social media and other places to quickly call out somebody's fault. So finding that we have slavery or child labor in our supply chain can come back immediately and take a hit on your stock price. So we're beholden to the shareholders and the general public in a way that we never were before with this much visibility. So I think it worries them because, you'd love to say, well, I hand it off to my risk officer. But if you source a poor agreement and you haven't done your homework, so yes, your risk officer, you hope, would have caught it, but they're not going to think kindly on you, and they're not going to report well on you if the fact that you are sourcing and not putting risk mitigation into your sourcing initiatives. So I would say risk is number one, and then how to get rid of transactional procurement so they can be more strategic.
Right.
Because I don't have a single member that has carte blanche on hiring. And so if you have to now manage this enormous risk in addition to everything else you were doing before, you've got to be able to do more with fewer people. Yeah. So get rid of the transactional procurement, automate it, put in RPA, and just stop it. And plus, millennials don't want to do repetitious transactional sourcing. That's not what they went to school for.
Right.
So if we know that that's not going to keep our employees happy, why not automate it and get rid of it? And, that's my passion right now is, nobody wants to do dumb work and boring work.
And so is that you talked about next practice before. Is that next practice for procurement? Is it RPA, automation, cognitive procurement? I'm really interested in what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, so I don't know if you knew at our last summit, we actually did live RPA.
I saw it from afar and thought, what? Yeah, I thought, what the heck is that? I'd love to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do is a proof of concept, a POC. And so Honda is very forward thinking. And of course, because they're a transportation manufacturer, they have robotics, of course, in the factory. So they knew what it was. So the head of procurement said, let's see if we can automate some of these processes. And we've been doing automation forever. RPA is just the use of a bot, and it's different than just automating a process. So what people don't understand, this is not system integration. RPA is it's a layer that sits on top of all your systems, and it replicates what a human being would do. So, for example, in this case, we wanted to automate onboarding a contractor. And so it received the contractor, it put it up in SharePoint, it ran it through a background check, it checked the rate card for plausibility through People Ticker, then it approved the onboarding of the contractor, uploaded them into their HRO system, and issued a security tag for that person and ordered their uniform. And that's a process that normally could take 8 to 11 days because somebody has to go in and, I have to open an email, I have to approve an request, I have to get it, I have to send it out to our background check company, I wait for it to come back, I get it, I upload it up into SharePoint, I then send it over to People Ticker. All of these are systems that you go in and log into, whether it be your email or your SharePoint or your HRO or your background check or your People Ticker account. And so we were able to, we process mapped it all before the summit, but we actually programmed this bot to do all the human, open the screen, click these keys, close the screen, carry the number over, carry the resume, run it through, log into this system, enter it, and it did it all. And it did all the human processes in about 30 seconds. Right. Now, you can't get a background check and get your People Ticker in 30 seconds, but it did the automation of all of this human interaction in 30 seconds. And it's just as if you have a robot with arms and with hands, opening, reading, closing, carrying it over, copy pasting, re-entering, but it did it without a human.
Right.
And so you don't have boring work. And you have the fact that it's going to be consistent and no mistakes across the board. So, you won't mistype the person's name the third time. You won't accidentally put the wrong rate. Everything will hold its consistency all the way through the process. And so that was our proof of concept that we did live at the summit. But there's so much more in transactional procurement that we could automate this exact same way and take people out of the process. You've already got rate cards. You've already got preferred suppliers. You already have catalogs. Why are humans touching it at all is really what we want to get rid of and just have that part of the transactional procurement automated and then just escalate when you have things that are out of sync or, that just don't work.
Right. Need additional approvals or outside of certain boundaries.
Right. And the anomalies, yes.
So I'd imagine, you talked about people ticker, you talked about background checks on the other side, you're kind of interacting with other service providers, but I imagine over time, they will actually have this automated as well. So you will be able to put a request from, have this bot make a request to ultimately a bot on the other side with another service provider, and that information come back in seconds rather than having to wait for somebody then to kind of do their bit to then allow the process to continue.
Yeah, and in this case, People Ticker is fully automated, so they already had an account.
Mm-hmm.
So they have so many instances. So they'd logged into their account, ran the check, and as long as I think it was plus or minus 2% of the pay that was expected in the PO, it was going to go through approval. So we had to set the variances, what was allowed, and what what are the outliers. And so so many of the other systems that we need to access are automated, but it still takes us logging into our account, putting in our credentials,
right.
Getting the information, extracting it in Excel or whatever it is, logging out, uploading it, and then at the end, it even processed all the emails. So to the hiring manager, this person's approved. To the person that was being contracted, to their company, this person's approved. This is their start date. All of that was automated at the end.
And from what I understand, I've been looking at this actually from a marketing perspective, just with the show, and having a messenger bot on the homepage that interacts with visitors to the website, and helps them kind of find content that's of interest to them. And when you look behind the scenes of how to do it, it's actually not that difficult. Once the technology exists to program it, it seems like it's, some dark art, I think. And I went into it thinking that as well. But then when I started to play around and learn, using a technology that's already built to help you do it, it's pretty straightforward to do it. It's just all about kind of process and logic and building ifs and whens and things like that into it. But I didn't find it altogether difficult, especially not from a procurement perspective, when we're used to dealing with process and we're used to dealing with complex spreadsheets in Excel about how to make decisions. I don't think it's overly complicated. At least that was my perspective.
I agree, and I love the use of chatbots in sourcing and in procurement as well. And there's just so much more we can do to alleviate, how many times, we have a help desk that has to answer the same dumb question again and again. Why not have that be a chatbot that's been trained through the rigor of what we're paying a human being, to answer silly things with? So those type of things, I just think are that is the wave of the future.
Yeah.
The exciting one we're doing for the next summit, though, I'll let you peek under the covers a little, is we are going to use augmented reality.
Right.
And we are working with HCL as the programming experts. We're working with Alphasant as the advisors. And MUFG has agreed for us to go in and use augmented reality to train some procurement training for their organization to create it. So AR versus VR AR is augmented reality. So we will be using the Microsoft HoloLens and shooting in 360-degree photography as we go through this training. And a person will be able to put on the lens and actually experience the training as if they're in the room and they're walking into a room and they're walking back out and they're going into another room and experience the training virtually from their seats. And MUFG being Mitsubishi, Bank of Tokyo, one of the largest banks in the world. They have offices throughout the world. And if they could take some of their cutting edge ideas and get buy-in by having people experience it live throughout the world just by sending them the lens, and when you're done, pack it up and send it on to the next organization.
Yeah.
So we're going to be showcasing our progress at the next summit, and we're hoping to have 3 to 5 lenses for people to put on and be able to go through the 10-minute training module.
That's fascinating.
So that's our next thing.
Yeah.
I just love pushing it this way.
Imagine then being able to put people in like case studies. You could actually put people in real world situations as a case study rather than just something that's written on a piece of paper. Really bring it to life, but also kind of the human element that comes with some of the things. I'm just doing a training and development program right now, and it's still hard to. Everything's very good in concept that you might try and help people go on that learning journey, but when they're actually in that situation, when the blood is pumping, it's a little bit different than sitting in front of a PowerPoint. So being able to put people in the moment, I think, would be really powerful.
Yeah, and then eventually being able to put lots of people into the same training program from around the world at the same time and be able to interact with each other. So, that takes, think about what we can do to travel budgets so that people don't have to travel in for training, but we can be training truly effectively remotely and giving them the experience that they wouldn't have otherwise. So that's our next one at the next summit. And then we're going to be moving into AI and doing some really cool things using cognitive computing and hopefully getting into predictive analytics. That's the next push I really want to have.
Yeah, you mentioned Watson earlier. Are you finding that members are asking more about cognitive procurement and what the benefits are and what some of the use cases could be of that?
The forward-thinking ones are talking about it and hoping for it. Of course, we have IBM buy side as a member, and so they're able to bring us, the things that they're doing. So it is becoming more and more real. And a lot of the large outsourcing providers are, working on their own versions of Watson as well, because it is going to be critical. But can you imagine when we can actually do forecasting and it might be right, for a change?
Right. Have confidence in our numbers.
Yeah. That could really be a game changer. The other thing, though, that I'm trying to get people to realize, I just spoke at a utility conference, so investor-owned oil and gas utilities, is the 3D printing is going to have such a huge impact on their supply chains. And they don't get it, that I'll be able to print on demand. So think about my spare parts. I'll be able to print in 7 different alloys or plastics, different types of materials. So I can print spare parts just by ordering the specs. Or I can take something that's broken and use 3D photography to create the piece that might be chipped off, and then upload that and 3D print a replacement part for something that's broken. They're doing 3D printing in space right now. And if they used to have to send down and wait for a shuttle to come up with a replacement part, now they can print in different alloys depending on the tensile strength that they need, and they can print replacement parts for the space station right now. So people just don't understand that that's going to be, if you are a supply chain manager, instead of huge warehouses, you might have small print factories,
right,
and do just-in-time printing,
yeah,
and and not carry inventory. So then maybe forecasting on some of these things isn't going to be as necessary.
Yeah, because
it's going to be more about now you're negotiating. Yeah, you print on demand. You just have to negotiate the price of whatever metal alloy you're getting, to print with. So I think there's so much on the horizon, and I think in the next 10 years, it's going to revolutionize our entire industry. And there are going to be companies that embrace it,
yeah,
and companies that don't.
Right.
In fact, I was just reading this morning about a company up in Boston that I can't wait to go. But they have an automated 3D knitting machine, and they will completely knit in wool a blazer. You choose the material, the cut, the collars, the cuffs, everything, and they 3D knit it in 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Wow. Custom made for me for $345. 90 minutes is long, so you can't mass produce, but think of the inventory they don't have to carry.
I know. And those kind of things are typically, it's not like they're flying off the shelves in their hundreds every day, is it?
Right. But think when we can start, getting our clothes made, I just buy a spec, I, send it to a local print shop and they print it for me. That's even faster than Amazon, 2-day delivery. Of course, in some cities you do have the 2-hour window, but I can have custom made clothes, for the same price, printed, a block away, why wouldn't I? So I just see that if people really just need to be thinking about the fact that, Moore's Law is here, where, the amount of computing capability is in the billions when it doubles every year. And we have to be aware that, yes, it's coming at us faster and more powerful, and embrace it and just see what's next.
So how can maybe given the experiences you have in speaking with procurement leaders, it's how people are actually doing, but how could you embrace all of this? So there's so many different possibilities, I think, that we talked about, that it can seem a little bit overwhelming if you look at them all and try and, think of them all together, of what impact they could have on your business, of your organization. Do you kind of encourage procurement leaders to just look at one, think about one, think of the impact, and kind of map that out before another, or is everything really interconnected?
Well, it's a good question, and it depends on your team and your leadership.
Yeah.
A strong sourcing professional should be able to have all three things looked at in their organization at once, and then come together for the intersection. But if you don't have that kind of visionary leadership, then I say start with one and do a proof of concept.
Yeah.
Then go to the next one, do a proof of concept. Because a proof of concept will speak just volumes to your team and to your leadership.
Yeah.
And bring them, so all the naysayers can't be naysayers when you've already proved it does work.
Right.
And all the people that say it doesn't apply to us, well, guess what? It just did.
Mm-hmm.
So I like POC as a way, because I think some people need to touch it, feel it, see it, experience it before they want to get on that bandwagon. And the rest of, then I keep hearing people like, oh, we've been doing automation forever. There's nothing new. No, it is new. It is different. A bot is not the same as what you automated before.
Right.
It is game changing, so it's really understanding the technologies and the future and what it's doing. And if nothing else, to me, if you're going to be a sourcing professional today, you have got to have an insatiable curiosity.
Yeah. And
you've got to be reading and educating yourself, because if not, somebody else is going to come in and do it to you.
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. That's what I tell so many people is we got to be the leader of our own change and embrace all this technology, because otherwise the decision is going to be made by the CEO or CFO or CIO or whoever it is. Some supplier is going to come and say, why do you even need this procurement team? Because I've got this great technology. And they're going to make the decision away from us. And the other thing, the opportunity for me in procurement as well with all this is we talked about how all this impacts procurement. But how does this impact the other things that you buy, the category that you buy? Because you can be sure if it's going to impact procurement, it's going to impact everything else that the organization buys. And we can really be leading the charge in educating our stakeholders how this could impact them.
Yeah, and so when people are in our online, we have SIG University, which is our online certification for sourcing professionals. We have full modules and learning lessons on all these topics. And one of the questions to each person is now describe how it affects the category that you manage. And we have to struggle with some students who just can't grasp it. Like, well, it really won't affect mine. Mine's different. Mine's food.
Right.
Oh, well, they can 3D print food.
Yes.
They can 3D print medicine.
Yeah.
So they're getting to the point. So, there's a woman who had cerebral palsy and was a singer, a professional singer, and was so hunched over and that she could not sing any longer. They 3D printed a spine for her.
Wow.
She now stands straight and tall and is back in her musical career. That's a spine. So if they can 3D print a spine, they think that they can grow DNA and eventually 3D print our own internal organs. This is now and this is here right now.
Yeah.
They're able to do this. And this is not the Jetsons. It's not just a cartoon show. It's not maybe one day. This is all really happening now. Like 5 years ago, it was $200 to 3D print a hamburger patty. It's now down to $12.
Right.
And it's DNA of a cow grown in the lab to 3D print, and you cannot tell the difference between a grown DNA or a cow that you got to slaughter. So if you can 3D print, think of that, how many hundreds of gallons of water go into a cow on an annual basis.
Yeah.
That just water alone and the methane gases that they give off. If we didn't have to slaughter animals anymore, and we could have a few cows around just because they're cute and friendly, and we don't have to have,
mow the lawn for
what we
us.
do for the climbers.
Right.
Yeah, they can come over and mow your lawn, but you're no longer slaughtering.
Right.
And we have less methane gas and less need for water for these animals. It's game changing that way, and that's what people just need to really open up and think about.
Yeah, is there something
and
that?
Be curious.
That being curious, looking at this through your category lens, but just thinking of what's even possible, what's the art of the possible. I was going to follow up and ask: is there kind of an aha moment that you see in people when you're talking about this, when people actually kind of, realize, what? This is important. I do need to understand. I do need to learn about this, and there's kind of a trigger. Does that happen to people? Is there a light bulb that goes off, or is it people who are automatically kind of curious that just get it? Do you find when you're talking?
No,
to
well,
folks?
The curious ones get it. I would say, quickly. But like we had a small 3D printer at our last summit that was just 3D printing fidget spinners.
Yeah.
Just to show people, it's that easy. Somebody else came up and said, "Can you print me an owl?" Sure, we can print you an owl. Her father collects owls, and he used to be a scientist, and she said he'll love the fact he has a 3D printed owl. So 3D printed an owl for her. And, it's my home printer. So, and I got it from my my 17-year-old son for Christmas. And one day I broke a spatula. I said, "Can you print me a spatula?" Went online, print me a new spatula. And that's in my own home. And just think of, so I just tried to show people that this isn't impossible. They have there's a 3D printed 12-passenger van now, where 75% of it is 3D printed.
Right.
3D printed homes, 3D printed bridges. It's here. And so you have to, for me, having the stories of what's really been done is the best, because that's where most people hear the concepts, but they don't hear the stories associated.
Mm-hmm.
So, like the young guys who got together and created a zero gravity, 3D printer called Made in Space. It was just an idea that they had. Wouldn't it be neat if you didn't have to wait for a shuttle to come up and bring a replacement part? And now it's sitting in the space station with the entire Lowe's catalog who partnered with them, so that anything in a Lowe's catalog can be 3D printed in all these different elements in space. So showing people that it's here, that was developed by normal, everyday people. It wasn't developed by NASA.
Yeah.
So, it's really taking the time to show them it's here, it's now, it's exciting, embrace it. Yes, it's a little scary. Yes, it's sometimes a little hard to comprehend. But if you keep reading and studying, it gets easier and easier to embrace it.
It takes it away from the hype or the hyperbole and makes it the reality.
Exactly.
I think that's the connection that we often miss, because we read so much, and it's sometimes hard to conceptualize what that means for me as an individual. But then it seems, well, that's far off and I don't really need to worry about it. These stories actually make it real and make it reality.
Right. And that's our goal as leaders, is that if we can get rid of the hyperbole and say this is the reality, now we can start thinking realistically on how it can apply to our supply chains and our sourcing initiatives.
So I know that it's getting to be time to wrap up, and I just had a final question. And that's, what's next for SIG in terms of how you kind of help educate, inspire procurement leaders, procurement practitioners to think about what next practice is, how it's going to impact them. And I know you talked about the AR kind of case study, proof of concept you're going to be doing at the next summit, but I'd love if you can just share a little bit more about what's on your agenda.
Well, my agenda is to constantly be educating our staff, so that they're thinking of the next possibility. So we are always brainstorming, and every summit I want to have something that completely changes the way you think,
right? And
is your aha moment. So we're doing that, but I'm also getting out in the field and I'm talking to CPOs every single week, and I'm getting all of their pain points. So we are going to be looking at using augmented reality for some cybersecurity training that we want to be able to offer. We're partnering with NTT next year to start developing that so we can push the cybersecurity training out to these organizations. So I'm always looking at another way that I can elevate the industry, whatever it is that can elevate the CPO to being seen as more strategic and do more with less is really my goal in life.
Right. So as we wrap up, where can listeners go to learn a little bit more about the things that you talked about, about the proof of concepts that you did at the summit, perhaps if they're interested in coming to an event or kind of interacting with some of the educational material that you put out there? I'd love to just give you the chance to share where they can go and do that.
Yeah, so if they go to sig.org, sig.org, that will take them, there's links that will take them into SIG University if they want to get really deep training. We have a few videos that we did around the RPA that we did the last summit, and just something about the entire summit itself. But just get involved in the conversation. Join us for our webinars, join us for in-person meetings, and join us for our global summit. Our next one will be in Carlsbad in October, which is down by San Diego in California. And then the following spring, we have one in DC in March. So, we get out to you, but we really need you to come to us and get thirsty. Join a working council. We have a digital working council that is behind all the processes that we're trying to do. They're helping guide it. We have a number of different working councils. We have one on contingent workforce. We have one on governance tools and automation and technologies. So we have lots of different working councils where people can get involved and help shape, the experiments and the proof of concepts that we're doing, and really just get involved and be part of the conversation. Don't just read and listen,
right,
but converse.
Right. Well, this is fascinating. I think really some of the examples you gave that make it, I know I mentioned it a couple of minutes ago, but they really take it from being that hype, which I think we're all kind of guilty of, to the reality and figuring out, okay, how can this actually impact us? So I really just appreciate you joining me, Dawn, and for sharing, some of the thoughts of your members, but also some of the experiences that you're kind of helping share with folks in terms of understanding these technologies a little bit more and how they would impact them. So yeah, I just appreciate you joining me.
Thank you. It was very enjoyable talking to you, Phil. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Don. And what I'll do is I'll put links to SIG and some notes from today's conversation. I'll look up those videos as well from the RPA example. I'll put those in the show notes today. And that's going to be at artofprocurement.com/SIG-RPA. So that's artofprocurement.com/SIG-RPA. So one more time, Don, thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.